Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Revolution Recap. The Revolution's playoffs ended the same night they began as they tragically fell in penalty kicks to New York City FC at Gillette Stadium on Tuesday night. After Santiago Rodriguez stunned the home crowd with the opening goal in the third minute, Adam Buxa headed home a Carles Gil set piece in the ninth minute, drawing even at 1-1. It stayed at that score until extra time when Valentin Castellanos scored a header over Dewan Jones. After Castellanos was red carded moments later, the Revs went on the attack, and Tejan Buchanan rocketed a volley home, making it 2-2, sending Gillette Stadium absolutely bonkers and forcing penalty kicks. But unfortunately, that is where this story ends, as there was no Turner magic on this evening, as New York City FC converted all 5 penalty kicks, advancing to the Eastern Conference Finals and ending the Revolution season. It was a disappointing result for the Revs, but they were clearly the second best team on the night, in my opinion. And some people are questioning the 23-day layoff that MLS scheduled for the Revolution, as well as Bruce Arena's decisions not to use any subs until the start of extra time. And we are here to pick up the pieces and discuss this tragic mess of a soccer game. I'm Greg Johnstone. Joining me today is Sean Donahue. Sean, how's it going?
I'm still recovering from last night. It was actually my first game in the stands for, not in the press box, in the stands for a very long time, and a nice atmosphere for a Tuesday night with 25,000 fans. But 3 hours out in the cold and a disappointing loss for the Revolution. I'd say I'm still in recovery mode today.
This is a different podcast than that would have been done last night, and we didn't record last night because you were at the game. I don't know how we would have gotten through last night, because that was I don't know if I've ever been more devastated after a loss than that, which is crazy to think of. The MLS Cup loss. There have been some other big losses in Revolution history, but yesterday it seemed like a real shock to the system. And even the night after, I'm still feeling it, but I think we're gonna have our emotions in check a little bit better. We'll see as the podcast goes on, but who knows? We'll see. Kris Valukis joining us today. Kris, how are you today?
Man, I've been mending. I've been trying to get better, but then, listening to this introduction that you just gave, very well put. But kind of slap on the face to my recovery from last night. But doing as good as I can, and talking about seeing the way that the game ended and everything last night. And I watched it from home, watched the broadcast on Fox, and I was stunned when it was over. I was just kind of sitting there on my couch for maybe an hour, just kind of thinking and just staring, not really doing a whole lot. Just watching Fox turn into the Qatar game until the Fox app asked me if I'm still there, and I still didn't even touch the remote. I was just sitting there for way too long, just in disbelief, gutted, I think is probably the best term to describe how I felt after last night. And just trying to move past that and think ahead. There's a lot of positives to take away from the season and a lot to look forward to. So I'm trying to focus on that now.
Well, there's a lot of positives to take away from the season. I don't think there's a whole lot of positives to take away from last night. A lot of anger, a lot of disappointment, a lot of frustration today across Revolution Nation. Sean, let's start with you. What's your key takeaway from last night's loss?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways you could go with this one, but the biggest surprise to me and my biggest takeaway is that, the Revolution went into this game, like it was an away game, I thought. We've seen them play New York City a few times this season. When they've been at home, last time they played New York City, they had 59% of the possession. When they went to Red Bull Arena, they had 49% of the possession. And in this game, I think they were at 52% possession. Actually, 42.7% possession, which is, not what you're used to seeing from the Revolution in a home game. We're used to them when they're at home, controlling the ball more and creating chances and being patient. And we really saw none of that in this game. I think the Revolution, when they had chances, were constantly on the counterattack, and New York looked more like the home team. And if there's one thing we know about, New York City, it's that they're a team that plays really well, kind of compactly. Because of how they play at Yankee Stadium. They're a really good home team at Yankee Stadium, playing in that tight, narrow space, and they're used to playing that way. And I think the Revolution played right into this by, going with that diamond, not having too much width, and, played right into New York City FC's hands in this game. And that's why, the Revolution's possession was lower than we've seen at times this season, including against New York City FC, and why I think they're on the back foot for much of this game. It was a very, very disappointing performance by the Revolution, in which they just didn't look ready. after the long layoff, and I think Bruce Arena didn't have them kind of tactically ready for this game. And when things weren't working out, he was too slow to make a change, waiting until the 90th minute to actually do anything about it. So, I guess my takeaway is that the Revolution just weren't ready for this matchup, because we've seen them play New York City a few times this season, and when they played on pitches, like Gillette, that actually has some width to them, they've generally either been 50-50 in possession with New York City, or gotten close to 60% possession in one of those games. So what we saw on Tuesday was definitely a blueprint of kind of what not to do against New York City FC if you want to come out with a victory, and just a complete inability throughout the game to keep possession. And I think a lot of that comes down to bad passing. I think Carles Gil was at something like 64% passing, which is very low for him. And the attack in general, the passing just wasn't good enough to have any really spell of good possession for the Revs.
This is, I think we're going to combine our key takeaways here, Sean, because it's similar to what I have. And my key takeaway is more or less that this game was lost before it began, because the Revolution did not look like a mid-season team. That was probably one of their worst games they've played this season. It's their worst game they've played in a really long time. They just didn't seem up for it. And New York City FC is a very talented team. I don't mean to take anything away from New York City FC. They've gone toe-to-toe with New England throughout the season. There have been a couple of games. The 3-2 game that New England won, I believe that was at Yankee Stadium earlier this year. If you look at the expected goals, New York City FC clearly should have won that, and I think Matt Turner had some crazy saves. So, I don't want to underestimate New York City FC. They're still one of the top teams in the league. But I remember there was one play where Polster got his yellow in the 28th minute here, and that was the second foul where he came in really late. And I could just that kind of tipped off to me that Polster probably just wasn't as sharp. He was a little bit behind, a little bit late on everything. Tommy McNamara seemed totally late. I mean, really, if we're listing off players who played well last night, the list is DeJuan Jones, and then maybe Andrew Farrell, but he had that bad backpacks, and then Emma Boateng, and that's it. So, obviously the 23-day layoff was a real challenge for Bruce Arena and this team. But I think whatever they did to prepare really wasn't good enough. And I'm not sure what exactly they did do or what they didn't do. But whatever they did, it really didn't work out.
Well, and just one more point too, is even breaking down further how the game went, the Revs had 35% possession in the first half. So they spent the first 45 minutes kind of chasing the game. I mean, there might have been 1-1 on the scoreboard, but I think that put them in a hole right away. So, of course, the goal did. But the fact that they had to chase the first 35 minutes of the game in the cold, when whatever they did, I don't think they were, ready to go 120 minutes, especially after 23 days without a game. And, you mentioned we don't really know what they did during this break. Well, what we do know is that they didn't bring anyone in for a friendly. So they only scrimmaged against themselves. And Bruce Arena had mentioned that they were probably going to bring in, one or two teams for a friendly match. And I think that they really got burned by not doing that. And I understand it was probably difficult to find somebody, but you had to find somebody. And if you didn't find somebody, maybe you should have traveled somewhere to play somebody. And I clearly looked rusty to start this match, and 35% possession in the first half at home, I think is kind of inexcusable.
Well, and they kept getting beat too. We'll let Chris talk in a minute here, but they kept getting beat too. If it's one thing to be Nashville and park the bus and let the game come to you and not hold possession or boot it long and kind of chase it down and whatever. The Revs were trying to establish possession on the wings, and they kept losing the ball. And then New York City would counter, and there were times that they got in behind the defense. Brandon Bye a number of times. I counted 2 or 3 times where there was a long ball over Brandon Bye's head, and he just kind of got crossed up, and he didn't really play it well. How many times did DeJuan Jones have to make some emergency defending and sprint back there? There was the play where DeJuan Jones was a cross that looked like it was, I believe it was Rodriguez, looked like he was going to tap it home, and DeJuan Jones miraculously got a foot in to clear it out for a corner. There were a number of plays that New York City FC got in behind the defense. So they weren't controlling the game, and they were still suspect at the back. You're absolutely right, Sean. That first third of the game was a disaster. And then even if you expand it out for the full 90 minutes, New England was the second best team on the night by far. I think they were lucky to have it tied after 10 minutes, and they were lucky to have it tied at halftime. They were lucky to have it tied at full time, and they were very lucky to go into penalty kicks. And if they didn't get that red card, they probably would not have gone into penalty kicks. So they caught a ton of lucky breaks, and still, unfortunately, were not able to finish the job. So, and I'll give you one more stat too, in case fans have not vomited enough over the past couple of days. But according to Who Scored, loss of possession. Are you ready for this stat, Sean?
Yes.
Loss of possession. New York City FC lost possession 19 times. New England Revolution lost possession 40 times.
Well, and
Tajon Buchanan lost possession 12 times.
Yep.
DeJuan Jones lost. He was the best player in the game. He lost possession 7 times. I mean, Bo Buxa. I don't know how many touches they had, but it's not many. They both lost possession 4 times. Just very rust all the way around. Disgusting performance. And this team does not deserve to be MLS Cup champions. So just not prepared. I think this falls on coaching. We can trash the players all we want, but I think this really comes down to the preparation. And obviously there's no handbook on how to prep a team after a 3-week layoff, but just a total mess. So Kris, you've been patiently waiting. Do you have any key takeaways? Or you can add on to that if you want, but you can also talk about a key takeaway if you'd like.
Well, yeah, sure. My takeaway, it's a little bit contrarian to some of the points that Sean was making. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the game management and about the subs. I'm not going to talk necessarily about the players that were subbed in, but the timing of the subs. We've been seeing off and on all season, Bruce consistently is making late subs much later than what we feel like should be happening in a game. And last night was no exception to that. And it was actually to the extreme where a full 90 minutes completed before any subs were made. And this might be the only time that I'm ever going to say this, but I think that last night was probably the prime scenario to run through an entire game and not make any subs, because going out that entire, first and second half, primarily talking about the second half, I understand there's a lot of players that were rusty and not playing well. At the same time, you're playing in such a hectic and crazy environment in this playoff game, and the flow of the game with the players on the pitch, it's gonna change drastically when you take one player off for another. And the game was so tight all match. I mean, granted, New York City was on the front foot. New England did a good job of making sure that they weren't, finishing their chances. Castellanos also made a good job of not finishing some chances as well. But, getting lucky and grinding it out is kind of what they were doing. And I felt any changes that they were going to make to try to push the attack forward is going to hurt them defensively and just really open them up. And I don't know if you can do that in that sort of scenario where you're tied, especially late in the game. I don't know how you go and you're going to change up your lineup to try to go for the win when you still have extra time available to you, when you still have penalties available to you. I don't see the point in trying to make that sort of change. If you want to make a change to go defensive, maybe you can do that. I don't know why you take off your attacking talent when you're tying and you're trying to get ahead. So it's definitely going to be a very unpopular opinion. But I think my takeaway is just Bruce actually got it right this time, and this is what we've been seeing from him all season long. And I've been very critical of his decision making when it comes to when he chooses to make his subs. But I think that last night was just a prime example of when you make them late and why you make them late. You have to be very careful of how you're going to affect the flow of the game and how you're going to open it up. New York was pressing all night, and the fact that they weren't scoring was, a miracle, really. Nothing short of that. But you can't go take off any of your midfielders or defenders at that point and replace them with attacking players and think that New York City is not going to attack anymore. But you also can't put on more defenders in that moment. So I don't know what you do. And I think it was a good decision after full time was up to actually make some subs. I disagree with the subs that he made. I don't think Tristan belonged in that game whatsoever. I don't think he showed anything all season long, except for maybe that 2-goal performance against Miami. But Tristan did not deserve to be here. I mean, why was Scott Caldwell not on the roster? I don't know. That would have been maybe a way that I would go. You want to kind of control the tempo, bring in a player like Scott Caldwell. I think he does that well. He controls possession and gets that going. But again, I'm not going to harp on the player selection choices at this moment. But
you're hitting on 7 different topics that I want to cover here, and there's a lot. There's going to be a long therapy session.
Yes, it feels exactly like that.
So the subs are a big issue, and you're the only person in New England that seems to be on Bruce's side about this. So let's break it down here. So my first question to you is, so your theory here is essentially you don't want to rock the boat too much because any subs Bruce could have made would have impacted the flow, and there's no one on the bench good enough to replace anyone in the starting lineup that would have had a positive effect, more or less. Is that correct here?
Just about, yeah. I'll say Boateng is obviously going to be making an effect, and I think that he should have been brought on sooner. But who are you going to take off to bring Boateng on? You're just going to open up the pitch for New York? I don't understand.
Well, here's the defense of why not Boateng. Why Boateng was saved towards the end, and he came in the 114th minute and had an immediate impact. And we've talked about him throughout the year as being this impact, sub off the bench. Everyone seems to love him. And we got a question from James Downing here, who actually says New York City deserved the win. Better team by far, and better team and far more dangerous throughout. Any idea why we didn't see any subs? Cough, Emma, until so incredibly late. So here's my theory on Emma, because I think he's the only one that really you can kind of semi-defend, like why you would save him for the end for when they fell behind. It's because you want him kind of out on the wing. And so I don't know who you take off, because Polster and McNamara are both kind of central players. You don't really want Boateng kind of stuck in the center there. And if you look at Traustason, he actually was playing a little bit kind of right center a little bit. If you look at his heat map, he was kind of playing a little bit more right center, and then Maciel was kind of dropping back a little further back, maybe to the left. And then if you look at Boateng, he's kind of a little bit up and on the wing, which is where you would want him to be in the last 7 minutes of the game when you're down a goal. So I think with Traustason, they wanted him to play not so much attacking winger, more so kind of stabilize the middle of the field and kind of hold possession, which is where they were getting dominated all game. If you look at the team heat map, the Revs were really just up and down working the wings, and New York City FC was really kind of flooding the middle, and kind of, as Sean was pointing out, really using that kind of narrow depth to their advantage there. So I think Traustason and Maciel coming in for Polster and McNamara. Polster was on a yellow. I kind of understand that. And you're probably not going to use Polster for a penalty kick. McNamara didn't have a great game. I wasn't so sure about using two central midfielders kind of at that moment. I didn't really like the line change there, so to speak. I do think Scott Caldwell would have been a better choice here. Maybe Scott Caldwell and Maciel would have been a little bit better to hold possession and control the middle. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It is a tough question of what should Bruce have done. But they, in my opinion, they were the weaker team by far. Maybe Bunbury for Bo. You don't necessarily want to take Bo off because he can score a goal from nothing, but Bo really didn't have much of an impact on that game last night. So yeah, you're right. If you're down one, you might want Bo on the field. So Sean, what's your take on this? What do you think Bruce should have done?
Yeah, I mean, I think Chris and what he's saying is exactly how Bruce Arena was thinking. I think he's got it down that the Revs. This was the Revs' best 11. You're in a situation where you don't want to blow the game and end up losing because you take a risk and make a sub. But I completely disagree with that line of thinking. This is a Revolution team at home. They should be playing to win, not playing to conservatively to get a draw. And I think the substitutions were conservative substitutions, both in who was subbed on and the timing of those subs. And I do agree with Chris, when you look at the formation the Revolution put out there wasn't really a sub you could put in there like for like. That was going to have an impact, and that was not going to mess up the formation. I mean, you look at McNamara. Do you bring in Wilfred Kaptoum for him? Maybe that's a sub you could make that's kind of like for like ish. I don't think that would have been a good move. Bruce didn't put Kaptoum in, which I think is pretty telling about where his confidence is with his fourth highest paid player on the roster.
I don't think was Kaptoum available last night.
I thought he was on the bench. Am I wrong? Yeah, he was on the bench. He was available.
Okay, I stand corrected.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't know he was available based on the decisions that were made. But I think that's a point for maybe later in this episode or another show. But no, I think when you talk about how the second half was playing out and kind of playing it safe, the Revolution were being outplayed in the second half. They were outshot 8-5. They were outpossessed 58%. I think the Revolution needed to change things up. I think Bruce Arena needed to make a difficult decision, and that's take Gustavo Bo off. He had a terrible game. The Revolution could have switched to a 4-5-1 formation. They could have brought Boateng on, used him on the wings, exploited the fact that New York City was so narrow, and put Buchanan on the wing and used Buchanan in his best, the best way Buchanan's able to play, which is playing on the right wing. I think the Revolution are very capable of playing a 4-5-1 formation. I think you do that, it's not a move offensively where you're throwing things off defensively, but you're creating more opportunities for the Revolution to attack the wings with Buchanan and Boateng running at tired legs, as we saw when not completely fair because New York City was down to 10 men, but as we saw late on, caused New York City a lot of problems. So if you took Gustavo Bo off, who had a terrible game and who didn't even take a penalty kick when it got to PK, so I don't really know why they felt the need to keep him on, and push Buchanan out to the right and Boateng out to the left, I think the Revolution have a much more dangerous attack and cause New York City FC a lot of problems. I don't think that should have happened at halftime. But I do think when you got to the 60th minute and kind of saw how the game was playing out, that Bruce Arena should have taken that risk, which I don't even think is that much of a risk. Always a hard decision to take out a designated player in a key game. But we've seen throughout the season that Gustavo Bo has games where he's on and looks fantastic, and he has games where he's off and is kind of invisible. And this was one of those games where he's off and was kind of invisible. And he was also off in the Miami game at the end of the season where he had 8 shots and put 1 on goal, and his sharpness was really off. So it was kind of predictable that he wasn't going to be sharp for this game, because he kind of goes on these streaks where he's very sharp and doing really well, or these streaks where he's not sharp and needs to work his way back to sharpness. And he certainly wasn't going to work his way back to sharpness by not playing a game in 23 days. So I think, his performance was predictable, and I think Bruce Arena should have seen it. And by the 60th minute, kind of changed the formation and gone to a 4-5-1 with Boateng and Buchanan. But completely separate from that, and I'm not going to get too deep into it. Another problem is, going back to what Chris said, if you're going to keep the formation as it was, they didn't really have many good options with Scott Caldwell not on the bench, and they didn't really have many good options because of the fact Bruce Arena did not go into the season expecting to play a 4-4-2 diamond. That ended up being the Revolution's best formation. They don't have the right pieces off the bench to kind of change things up when you're playing that formation, because if you put Boateng on there, you have to change the formation. He's not a guy that can play centrally. Buchanan pulls it off, but I don't think he's at his best there either. And maybe that's a conversation for the next podcast, but I think that was in doing the post-mortem of the Revs this season, I think that's a big issue, is that the Revolution's best formation ended up being a 4-4-2 diamond, and they didn't realize that going into the season, so they didn't invest in the right depth pieces, and then they did nothing about it in the summer window either.
Yeah, and Bruce said after the game, I wish I had this quote up. I can look it up later. He said something to the effect of, "Oh, we don't have the best roster in the league. We're not close to the best roster in the league," or something like that. And that's really disheartening to hear after you made 0 moves in the summer transfer window. And I remember we talked about this, and I remember saying there is flexibility to make a transaction here. There is room to add another player, maybe not an international player, but they did have the cap space. Outside of the 3 designated players, no one on the team is a TAM player. I mean, they have the ability to go out and get another player if they realized halfway through the season that, they need another depth piece, or they need someone to fit the 4-4-2 diamond better. So I'm not, Bruce, the GM, is really letting down Bruce, the coach here, and I think that kind of all came to a head. They've been getting by with it all season long. For Bruce to kind of come out and say that, this isn't the best roster in the league or whatever, it's very disheartening to hear, because the results were phenomenal. I thought we did have the best roster in the league. I thought Bruce had everything he needed. And then we kind of get to when we need that extra piece and we don't have it. Here's the exact quote: "We don't have the best roster in the league. It needs to get a little bit better for sure." So not a great quote from Bruce Arena there. I think it's a really, really telling quote. Gustavo Bo's stats here, by the way, before we move on: 15 for 26 passing. That's 64%. He did have 2 key passes. He had 41 touches. And as I mentioned earlier, he was dispossessed 4 times, 0 for 5 on duels, 0 for 2 on dribbles attempted, 4 shots, 1 on target, 1 blocked, 2 off target. Just not the best night from Gustavo Bo. Completely vanished. You also mentioned too that he did not take a penalty kick. We speculated before the podcast that we expected him to be the 5th penalty kick taker. So maybe that's what they were saving him for. They're saving him for the pressure shot. I don't know who else would have taken it. Maybe Boateng. Although I also didn't expect DeJuan Jones to step up before Gustavo Bo, but there we were.
Or Tajon.
For Tajon, yes, that is true. Let's get into Scott Caldwell real quick, though, while we're talking about the crummy bench options here, which we didn't realize was a problem until the most important game of the season. Sean, any speculation on why Scott Caldwell was not available last night?
Yeah, I don't know what scenario Justin Rennicks comes into this game. I can't figure that out. I'm trying to think through what would have to happen for Justin Rennicks to have come into this game, and maybe Buxa and Bo both get hurt or something. But it would seem to me like you'd want to have Scott Caldwell on the bench, and I think Maciel didn't do a great job when he came on. He was okay. But defensively, I think he lacked a bit of what Scott Caldwell provides. So I don't really know why Scott Caldwell wasn't on this bench. Because to me, if you're going to take off Matt Polster because he's got a yellow card or because he's not ready to go 120 minutes, and I don't think Matt Polster had his best game. He had 90% passing, which is really good compared to the rest of the team. But he did whiff on that first goal, where I think he was the one guy that probably could have prevented that first goal, and he whiffed trying to get the ball. So it wasn't necessarily a sharpest performance. But if you're going to bring off Matt Polster, I think Scott Caldwell is your best option. Again, kind of going back to what Kris said about trying to not put yourself in a position where you're making a sub that's going to cost you the game defensively. Caldwell for Polster, I think, is kind of the safest bet there. So I don't know why he wasn't on the bench. There's been a few games this season where I haven't understood why he isn't on the bench. But if somebody can come up with a good reason, when Justin Rennicks would have played in this game over Scott Caldwell, I'd like to hear it.
That's such a good point, because Bruce threw all the cards on the deck onto the table. And out of all those cards, it was late in the game, right? In extra time, down a goal with 6 minutes to go. Bruce threw everything he had into the pitch. And guess what? Justin Rennicks is not part of that. So exactly what you're saying. When is Justin Rennicks going to come out? I mean, he still had one sub left to make. There was only 4 subs made. He could have thrown Justin Rennicks out there too. And if Justin Rennicks doesn't go out in that situation, there is no reason for him to be occupying a spot on the bench. You're not going to plan a bench around 2 designated players getting injured. It doesn't make any sense. I'm with you where I'm saying I don't understand why it happens, and it just frustrates me. And I'm getting a little worked up about it. But Scott Caldwell would have changed this game, in my opinion. I think that I don't know. I'm getting too worked up on it, but yeah, I don't know why he wasn't there.
Let the hate flow through you. Let the hate flow through you. Well, here's the other thing I'll say, and there's a number of damning things that we can kind of talk about here, and I mean, Maciel was kept on over Traustason. I mean, I'm going to switch over here to Traustason for a second, and we're all pointing out that he played 23 minutes. He played 23 minutes. He touched the ball 9 times. 0 for 2 on duels. Did have 2 recoveries. He had 2 interceptions there. He was dispossessed once. 3 for 4 on passes. Pretty invisible overall. But
his first play when he came on was that interception, and after that he did nothing.
Well, but you would still think of him as being a more attacking player than Maciel. Maybe Maciel was kind of just to sit back and kind of stay home. Maybe that was the logic there. But I was surprised to see Traustason come off. And like Maciel's on the field other than Traustason and Rennicks. I think that's all you kind of need to know in terms of, where those players stand. And, when you need a goal, Maciel is getting the call over Rennicks and Traustason. I mean, I just anyway.
And Captum.
And Captum. Yeah. All those players were bypassed for Maciel, who, I mean, in the moment, I can see why Maciel is playing in that spot. You want him to stabilize the midfield in a tie game. Down 1, why is Maciel on the field? I genuinely do not know. So
the only thing I'll say there is I think if you're going to pull off Henry Kessler and Maciel, you'd be putting yourself in a very, even against 10 men, you'd be putting yourself in a very risky position defensively on the counterattack, where I think that you have very little presence in the center of the field if you do that, I think.
Fair, but also, I mean, who gives a shit? Like, you're down 1, you know what I mean? You can't, like, it's not like you're trying to hold out a draw.
You're still going to have enough, some level of shape for the last 10 minutes or the last 7 minutes, where I think they were taking a lot of risks offensively, but I think it's one or the other. Either you leave Kessler on there and maybe push him up further, or you take him off and leave Maciel out there. I think if you take both, you're putting yourself in, I completely agree. You have to take a lot of risks. They did take a lot of risks, but I think there's some level of you're down only 1 goal, gotta preserve some sort of shape.
Yeah. I think it's possible. I hear you. I get what you're saying, but I also, I don't think Maciel adds anything there. I guess that's what I'm kind of saying. Like, I get what you're saying, and I just view it as, you have 10, New York City's down a man.
Almost down two.
Really down 2 men because their left back there was hobbling. I mean, they're the ones that are playing for PKs at that point. So I understand you don't want to get beat at the back and totally destroyed and all that. So I get that logic, but I don't know. It really makes me question. I don't know. I think they should have been more aggressive because I had that feeling that, especially once it went 2-2, I don't know. Basically, you had a 2-man advantage. I mean, why not put on Renix for Maciel? I understand you want to keep some shape. Although, again, I would have kept in Tristison. I feel like you can kind of keep a little bit of shape with Tristison kind of in the center of the field. So I get it. I get the logic, but I think playing for a tie, and that's not necessarily playing for a tie, but I don't know. I think they had to be aggressive in that scenario.
I just wish they were more aggressive in the 90th minute. Or,
yes.
Well, not in the 90th minute, in the 60th minute. But if they're going to wait till the 90th minute, take the subs, I think those should have been more aggressive subs than they were.
Building off of Chris's earlier point, it seems like Bruce is saving the subs for situational plays. He's saved Bunbury and Boateng for the 114th minute for an all-out aggressive push. And then he still had one on the table. So he saved his subs till late in the game until he knew what the situation was. And then he burned a sub when they had the foot on the throat and they were pushing forward for the tying goal and the winning goal in the final minutes. I guess that's kind of where I'm at, where it's like, why not? Why not push forward and use that final sub? And, I don't know. It was a total mess of a game, and I'm not sure what the right answers were. So maybe I'm kind of speaking. I don't know.
Who are we to question the MLS Coach of the Year? So.
I will say he's won MLS Coach of the Year 4 more times than me. So he obviously knows what he's doing. It's just a shame that his GM failed him with a bad roster. Let's get back to Scott Caldwell, because I do have some points here I want to make. Because also missing from this lineup is Christian Mafla. Also missing from this lineup is Edward Kiza, who was making the 18 over Justin Renix. Justin Renix is kind of like the third goalkeeper that when they make the 18, you're like, well, no one else is available, so they just use the spot on someone. Caldwell is a free agent. I don't know what Mafla's status is. I don't think his contract status is known. I would have to look that up.
I don't think it is either.
Edward Kiza, to me, we don't know his contract status. Edward Kiza, to me, is a prime suspect to be cut or have his option declined if there's an option, as long as his second year isn't guaranteed, because he really was not that effective of a player, and he occupies an international spot. So I expect him to leave. So part of me wonders if this is a Diego Fagundes situation where Bruce Arena had informed player XYZ, hey, we're not renewing your contract, just to let you know. We don't see you in this team's plans. Now, why would those players sit out a playoff game? I have no idea. I have no idea if it was a team decision. I have no idea if it was a player decision. I have no clue. But those 3 players being missing and with no explanation given, that strikes me as they know they're not coming back, and they were held out of this game for that reason. Does that make sense to me? Not really, but that's my theory.
Yeah, I mean, I think Renix is a candidate to get cut too, to be honest. He's been here, this was his 3rd season. He has not shown an ability to play at this level, and he turns 23 in March. So I don't know that he's not a candidate to get cut either. So I don't know if that's what it is. My guess is that it's not. I think Bruce, for whatever reason, lost faith in Scott Caldwell. I don't really get it. He started him for 3 of the 4 playoff games last year. I don't know why you wouldn't want a guy with his experience on the bench. And I do think the scenario came out where he should have played. So I don't get that at all. As far as Mafla, he hasn't shown a lot this season. He could be injured again for all we know. He could have gotten injured before the game. We know he's injury prone. I think Bruce Arena feels a lot more comfortable with AJ De La Garza, whether he's even if he's putting him at left back. And I also think if you're trying to decide one of the fullbacks to put on the bench, he probably likes AJ De La Garza's ability to play center back as well. I think when Farrell went down hurt in the first half, I think it was, fortunately he was okay. I think everyone in the stadium was probably holding their breath because, there isn't a good option to replace Andrew Farrell if they needed to do that. And maybe Bruce would have put De La Garza there over John Bell. I don't know. But the Mafla thing doesn't surprise me. We know Mafla hasn't lived up to his salary. I think he's going to be gone next year. It's really, and Edward Kiza, like you said, is he just like Justin Renix, whether or not he was on the bench, he wasn't coming in. It's the Scott Caldwell one that really surprises me.
Well, and then going a little bit further on the players that aren't here, Luis Caicedo, is not there. And if the Revolution ever chose to disclose injury information, maybe we'd find something out. But Luis Caicedo is another player where, if healthy, might have been a very valuable substitution late in this game.
I bet he's gone. He's a guy that I would bet is gone next season.
Same.
Sure.
Yeah, I think he's gone too, and I've heard his knee injury was pretty bad. So I wouldn't be shocked if he's gone too. He's a holdover from the Friedel era, Friedel Burns era, I should say. I wouldn't be shocked if he's gone too. So maybe that plays into my theory. But I agree, Sean. I think you're right there with Mafla. Is that you already have De La Garza, you already have John Bell on the bench, so you have two defenders. Maybe an attacker would make more sense. But then why not Kiza over Renix? I think Kiza is a little bit more of a in the box, cross it up and go head it type of player, whereas Renix is more of a winger who would have come in a little bit helpful there. So I'm not sure why you put Renix on the bench over Kiza, who you've been putting in the 18 all year, only to not put Renix in the game. It's an odd decision.
I completely agree.
Let's talk about something positive. Let's try to at least talk about something positive. DeJuan Jones, we got a comment from Eric here. DeJuan played out of his skin last night. It sucks he got beat for the second goal, but ball never should have been played in. I'm looking forward to seeing him explode next year, knock on wood. Sean, give me your thoughts on DeJuan Jones's performance.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic performance. I think he was one of the few guys that can leave this game with his head held high. He did a great penalty kick in the shootout. He was up and down the field. He was asked to play kind of all sorts of different roles as the Revolution switched up the formation. He was, playing centrally at times when the Revolution were pushing everybody forward, and used his athleticism to good effect to kind of be on both sides of the ball. You can't ignore the fact that he got beaten on the header that put New York in the lead in overtime. Going back to him playing every position, he was he was playing more as a center back on there guarding the head of their striker, but he was in a position to win that header and he got beat. So that's not something you can ignore. But outside of that, I thought he was the Revolution's best player. 4 aerial duels won, 103 touches, by far the most in the Revolution, 80% passing accuracy, which, by the Rev standards last night was pretty good. By comparison, Brandon Bai was at 64.9% passing accuracy. He had 2 key passes, and, he scored, I think, the Rev's most confident penalty in the shootout. So extremely impressed with him. Like the commenter said, unfortunate that, he was at least partially to blame for the goal that Castellanos scored in overtime.
Yeah, DeJuan Jones too. I mean, I can't say enough good things about his growth and just watching him explode, really. And his talent is he's seething with this just crazy talent. I'm running out of adjectives and verbs and English words right now, but DeJuan Jones such a bright spot last night. He deserves a lot of credit for the way that he performed. I think it is harsh to put that goal on too much blame on him for that goal. Yes, he could have been a little better, but let's not forget that he's a winger converted into a left back. He's not a defender by any natural means. And then the fact that how many times did he bail out Andrew Farrell? Last night. Maybe there were some times where he bailed out Kessler too. I don't know for certain because I didn't pay that much attention to every single play, I guess. But Andrew Farrell, by the way, I think he had a fantastic game when it came to 1v1 on the pitch versus Castellanos. But overall, positionally, I thought he was caught out way too often, way too frequently, and I think that pulled DeJuan Jones in centrally far too often. And I think that overall, Jones did a fantastic job of living up to that request or that task or whatever it was that was asked of him. But credit to DeJuan Jones, fantastic game, fantastic player, and just can't wait to see him develop more next season.
Yeah, and DeJuan Jones, I've kind of criticized his defense in the past, but it has grown immensely. And he was very raw when he first started playing left back there. He wasn't the best defender, and he kind of used his speed to kind of recover on plays. And in the past couple of years, he has really come into his own as forming those defensive skills and really playing pretty solid left back. And is now kind of a natural defender. And also, he has that amazing speed that he can get back and he can kind of cover for other players' mistakes. And he can kind of get up and get into the attack. It won't be on any highlight reels because it didn't lead to anything, but there was one play where DeJuan Jones had a beautiful left cross. I've noticed that his crossing with his left foot is very good now. He's very good at crossing the ball with both feet. But he crossed the ball to Buxa, who was able to get a head on it over, I want to say, 2 defenders. And it was headed wide. It wasn't very, very close to goal. It was close, but it wasn't very, very close. But it was headed just wide, and it was great service from DeJuan Jones. So he played phenomenally last night. I want to give him all the credits, even though he did turn the ball over, or he was dispossessed 7 times. He does deserve a lot of accolades, because I don't think that game remains tied if DeJuan Jones isn't on the field last night. I think he was that important of a team. It's also worth noting, too, that the Defender of the Year voting came out, and DeJuan Jones was 5th in the league in Defender of the Year. So that is pretty interesting. And John Siegel of MLSsoccer.com, former guest of Revolution Recap, tweeted out today that he actually voted for DeJuan Jones to be in his best 11 in MLS. So DeJuan Jones didn't get Defender of the Year for the Revolution, didn't get the team award, but is getting some recognition league-wide. And also, I probably should mention, I don't know if this was known last podcast, but Bruce is the Coach of the Year, which Kris mentioned earlier. Matt Turner was the Goalkeeper of the Year. I think those might have happened in between our podcasts, so I just want to throw that out there. But yes, DeJuan Jones, very, very high spot for the Revolution last night. I thought another high spot, too, that I want to mention, big questions in this game about Adam Buxa and his status. He made it clear to the media on Monday before the game, that his foot was 100%. He was feeling great, had the goal, played pretty well, I thought. Didn't get a ton of chances. He had that header that I just mentioned. He also had a breakaway in the closing minutes that Sean Johnson saved and pushed over the bar. And then, unfortunately, had the missed penalty kick, which doomed the Revs ultimately in the end. Kris, you are the Buxa stan. Also, European rumors. Might have been Buxa's last game as a New England Revolution player. What were your thoughts on his performance last night?
I thought he was solid. He came to fight. He came to play. It showed. I mean, that goal he scored in the 9th minute was exactly what you need from him. I would have liked to have seen that. I know the cross that you were talking about, I forget what minute it was in, where it came from DeJuan Jones. Glancing header. It was maybe a couple yards wide of Johnston's far post. I would have liked to see that maybe be a bit more on target. I would have liked to see Buxa get maybe some more chances to shoot with his feet. He wasn't getting a whole lot of service in the middle of the park. I think New York City did a very good job of taking Carles Gil out of the game, and Gustavo Bo, I think, took himself out of the game somehow, and I think that really took away a lot of the service coming into Buxa. But when he was given opportunities, I thought Buxa was up to the task for most of the time. Of course, that penalty, it was. I've seen some people say it's a poor penalty. I don't know if I would call it a poor penalty. I would not call it a good one either. It's just a very average, mediocre penalty. I would expect more from him on that, given the fact that he is a designated player with lofty ambitions of playing at a high level in Europe. Hopefully, in the next couple of years, I think that's what he wants to do. And a player of the caliber where he sees himself should be taking a little bit of a better pen than that. So it's a bit disappointing. You don't expect to miss one penalty and have that be the deciding factor. It's pretty unfortunate that it's going to fall on Buxa. But overall, I think he had a fantastic game, and he should be very proud of his performance.
Do you think that was his last game in a Revolution jersey, Kris?
I don't want to talk about it.
Hey,
I do think it was his last game. I hope that I'm wrong and that we hear within the next week or two that he's signing a new contract for 2 more years, because I think that building around this team, this core that is out there right now, is a great way to go. I think Gustavo Bo is probably not the one that should have got the contract extension between him and Buxa, but maybe the fact that Bo got one is a bit telling that Adam Buxa is not getting one. And instead of replacing two DPs in the offseason, they're looking to just replace one.
Kris coming with the takes tonight, defending Bruce's subs, saying maybe Bo does not deserve the contract extension. Hot takes from Kris. Whew. I do want to add that Buxa does have 1 year left on his contract, but he has indicated that he is interested in going over to Europe. And by the way, I was going to move on, but you said you didn't want to talk about it, so I was about to move on. Then you cut back in. Clearly, you did want to talk about it, Kris.
Look, I had to say something. I can't just leave it, especially if it is his last performance in a Revs jersey. I'll be very sad if he goes, because I have really enjoyed watching him come over and watching him grow and develop and really fit in. But at the same time, you can tell how much he misses back home, being back in Poland, and who can blame him? I mean, Poland looks like a beautiful place, and can't beat playing in front of friends and family. So, maybe he's getting a bit homesick over here. Not too sure. It was a crazy year, of course, last year when he came over. This year is a bit more normal, but it's still maybe he's getting homesick. Maybe he wants to go. Maybe he's getting calls from clubs, and he doesn't want to miss out on those opportunities.
I almost wondered if the Revs had made it to MLS Cup and there was a sold out stadium, if that might have made him a little less homesick. But we didn't get to see that. We didn't get to see that. So we'll see what happens there. I just think the uncertainty around Poland making the World Cup is a negative in whether or not he stays with the Revolution, because I think if Poland had locked up a place in the World Cup, and right now they have to go to Russia and get a win in a single elimination game, and then if they win that, they were lucky they got drawn at home for what would be the final and play either Sweden or the Czech Republic. I think they'd probably be favored if they got to that final, but a huge task to go into Russia and get a win on the road in a single elimination game. And I think like if they were going to make the World Cup, I think Buksa would have been smart to stay here another year and not rock the boat and lock up his spot on the national team. But if that's not going to happen, and I think it's very uncertain that it is, there's more incentive for Buksa to leave now. And get himself established in Europe, and not worry about potentially having to fight for a starting spot to maintain his World Cup position, because I think that's very uncertain. But if Greg is right and there's only 1 year left on Buksa's contract, the Revolution need to sell him this winter or assign him to an extension, because if you wait until the summer and he's got 6 months left, his value is much, much lower, because teams at that point can agree to a pre-contract and get him for free. So if the Revolution are going to get a return on their asset and he's not signing an extension, they need to sell him this winter.
And I don't know. I also don't know if you heard that. I did hear another hot take by Kris there, where he said Poland looks like a beautiful place. That's another scorching hot take, Kris.
It does. I'm a big fan of Europe. I don't know. I'm Swedish too, and I've been over to Sweden a couple of times. I absolutely love it up in Scandinavia. Poland's not that far. It's right across one of those seas over there. And my last name is Lithuanian, which is right next to Poland. So yeah, I maybe I have some ties to Eastern Europe. So
are you and Matt Turner like distant relatives? I mean, I don't know that many Lithuanians. There can't be that many Lithuanians in the Northeast United States.
I don't know. I'd love to know more about Matt Turner's background, but when I heard that he was a Lithuanian passport, right? Is that what he has?
Yes, yep. Yes. Well, and we talk about Adam Buksa missing the penalty kick. Do have to kind of get to the other side. Matt Turner, unfortunately, 0 for 5 on penalty kicks. Sean, thoughts on Matt Turner's performance last night?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to put too much blame on the goalkeeper in a shootout, but if you told me the Revolution were going to be in a shootout and Matt Turner was going to make 0 saves, I would say you were crazy. I've seen some people say that none of those penalties were savable. That's just not true. There, 2 of them, if Matt Turner hadn't dove, he could have saved. We're basically down the middle. I will say the third one, which was the one he got closest to saving, was borderline unsavable because he was fully stretched out, and that one snuck in the corner. That was a perfectly placed penalty. The first one was pretty difficult. Again, I'm not sure it was unsavable. It was pretty difficult. They hard to fault him for that. But again, I don't put too much blame on Matt Turner. The game never should have gotten to penalties. But it is shocking to me that the goalkeeper that in my mind is the best in the league at saving penalties didn't manage to save any of them. Again, decent stuff from New York City FC on the penalties, but it's just, I don't know. It's hard to blame the goalkeeper at the same time. You expect Matt Turner to find a way to save at least one.
And I was talking. Oh, sorry, Kris. Do you have anything to say there?
No, I was gonna mention as far as the way that New York City was taking their penalties, and I know that Greg, you and I have a very similar thought as far as what New York City was doing, and I didn't know if you wanted to take it because I don't want to take that take from you if you wanted to make that point.
Yeah, well, I mean, the one that Turner got his hand on was bottom left, and then there was another one that Turner dove to his left, and the kick went to the right, and then Turner dove on all the other 3, and then they seem to be just kind of straight shots right down the middle. And my theory is that Matt Turner's penalty kicks saves, the limited amount of data available. I don't recall a single save that Matt Turner made where he wasn't making a full extension dive. And so I wonder if coming into this game, if New York City said, if we get to penalty kicks, let's just shoot it down the middle because Turner's going to dive off his line. So, and I believe the ones that were kicked straight down the middle were 2, 4, and 5. 4 and 5 at that point, they had a lead, I'll say, in the shootouts. And so I wonder if the penalty kick shooters 4 and 5 just said, hey, instead of trying to beat Matt Turner, let's just kind of kick down the middle and hope he goes for a dive, and we just need to tap it home.
Yep. That's exactly my thought on it as well. That's what I thought was happening. And, when we were talking before starting recording, you mentioned this as well. So I thought I'd let you say it because you're much better at putting thoughts to words than I am. So, yes, everything you said times 2.
I mean, it's a complete guessing game when it comes down to penalties, and I'd rather have Matt Turner in goal than the average MLS goalkeeper. Really unfortunate, just 0 for 5 last night, and also unfortunate that it comes days after Andre Blake saved 2 penalty kicks against Nashville. 3 penalty kicks against Nashville, whatever that was. Nashville didn't get one in. New York City didn't miss one. So a bit of an unfortunate events there for Matt Turner, who is still the rightful goalkeeper of the year, in my opinion. But nevertheless, still a tough way to go down, and tough to see Matt Turner, not save one. That was a bit of a rough way to end it. We talked about Buxa leaving. We got to talk about one more person who might be leaving. Bruce Arena was asked about his future after the game. Bruce Arena, 70 years old, is the only coach in the history of Major League Soccer to coach over the age of 65. I believe Paulo Maurer of The Athletic tweeted that out yesterday. Bruce does have 1 year left on his contract, but said he's taking it day by day. He's got to talk to the owners. I thought this was a weird answer because, of course, the Robert Kraft wants Bruce Arena back coaching this team. That, to me, speculates that maybe Bruce Arena is considering retiring. I don't know why he wouldn't just say, I'm definitely in for another year if he was fully committed to next year. Sean, am I dumb for speculating this? Was this just kind of your run-of-the-mill coach speak? Or are you actually a little bit concerned that Bruce Arena might be leaving in the offseason?
It's hard to ever read too much into anything Bruce Arena says because he's, cryptic often and sarcastic often. But this was not the response I expected from Bruce Arena. And, you can interpret it one of 2 ways. One that he's being humble and saying, we lost in the first round of the playoffs. There's nothing's guaranteed. Bruce, Bob Kraft could fire me tomorrow, which I know we all know is not going to happen. But, you could interpret it that way. But you could also interpret it as he's seriously contemplating his future and might retire next year. I think there was some speculation that if the Revolution won the MLS Cup, that Bruce Arena might want to go out, on, winning note and call it a day and maybe stay on in some advisory role or something and get somebody else the coaching role or even stay on as technical director. I don't know. I don't think it's crazy to speculate that or to be a little bit concerned based on that comment that he might not be back next year. But I also would be just as unsurprised if he was just trying to make some sort of humble sounding comment about, the fact that, Bob Kraft could fire him for losing in the first round of the playoffs, which we all know was a joke. Who knows? But nothing's certain. He might not be back next year. He's made a lot of comments in the past year about how much he's enjoys family time and everything. And he is 70 years old. He's certainly should have enough money to not have to coach anymore. So if maybe who knows where his head is after a very impressive season from the Revolution that did not end the way anyone wanted it to.
Chris, any thoughts on Bruce Arena here?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot that I can add as far as what to take away from his comments because Sean is right on the money. What I can do is just offer what I think is going to happen. I think he'll be around for one more season. I think give it one more go, kick the tires one more time, try to lift the cup one more time, and he's currently tied for regular season wins for career coaching with Siggy Schmid. Does he go to get that record? Does he say, I want to go one more season, get that record? Is that important to him? Maybe. He's going to tell you it's not. But, personally, I think accolades are a really, really awesome thing to have, for your legacy.
Really quick, Bruce also said if you didn't think this was a successful season, you need your head examined. A little extra context. The question was asked by Sam Minton. So I think Bruce Arena just likes to tell Sam Minton that he needs his head examined. But That did spark a little bit of a debate of whether or not it was a successful year. So real quick, answers 15 seconds or less. Kris, was this a successful season?
Yeah, I just listened to the previews and predictions episode of the podcast from April, and everyone was saying that our expectations were third or fifth in the East, not first in MLS. So absolutely successful season.
Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm wishy-washy on this one. I think it was a successful season, but at the same time, I think if you had asked us for our predictions at the start of the season, we would have said at least one playoff win would be needed for a successful season. Of course, not thinking the Revolution were going to run away with the points record. Again, running away with the points record is hard not to say it's a success, but it is a very disappointing way to end it. And you would have wanted the Revolution to at least get one or two playoff wins to give the fans something to cheer about in these home playoff games.
Yeah, I think if they win one more game, it's a no doubt. Yes, it was a successful season, but to flop in the first playoff game really puts a bad taste in the mouth. And I think also lifting the Supporter Shield in hindsight in that season finale after you lose, also a bit of a weird feeling overall. So yeah, I think it's a success. You won a Supporter Shield. I think at the beginning of the season, a lot of people would have taken that. So I think on that measure it was a success, but awfully really just a really poor way to end the season. So I understand why a lot of people wouldn't see it as a success.
I'll add that they didn't lose any Open Cup games either this year, so that's pretty successful.
Again, if you went back to last year and you said the Revolution were not going to advance as far in the playoffs in 2021 as they did in 2020, and regular season aside, you would say that was certainly not a success. So we've kind of changed, because the regular season was so successful, we kind of changed the goalpost. But if the Revolution had finished second in the East and had a really good season, didn't break the points record, but maybe lost 3 more games than they did, and then lost in the first round, I think we'd probably say that wasn't a success. So it's hard not to call Supporter Shield the points records a success, but it's a kind of a success with an asterisk that they did not live up to the expectations for their playoff performance.
Yeah, and just a note here, our next podcast will be going through those bold predictions and going through a 101. So we're right on the money this year, so it'll be fun to kind of go through those, but we'll go through those on our next podcast. And you guys, you know what else is a success? Anytime you order a shirt from Golasso Kits. That's right, our sponsor, Golasso Kits. Their mission is to bring unique vintage jerseys to your home with a catalog of jerseys, jackets, scarves, and more from clubs and national teams from over 80 countries in the world. They have a variety of Revs merch as well, and just this week put up a 2012 training top in a men's large in excellent condition, now available for $40 before you use promo code RevsRecap. So that won't be there long. If you don't get it, Kris or I might get it. It depends on which one of us pull it up, but we'll be nice. We'll let it sit up there a few more days. It's not going to last long, so I can tell you that. But if that interests you, go check it out, GolassoKits.com. And even if you don't know what you want, you can check out their mystery kit packages where you enter in your size and what style of jersey you like, and Golasso will send you the surprise kit of your dreams. So check out GolassoKits.com for their full selection right now, and make sure you follow them at Golasso Kits on Twitter and at Golasso Kits on Instagram for updates for their new inventory. They have new videos every single Friday, and so you'll be the first to know what shirts just came into their selection. And when you find something you like, use promo code RevsRecap to save 15% off your order. That is promo code RevsRecap at GolassoKits.com for 15% off your order. The links and the code are in the show notes. Thank you to Golasso Kits for sponsoring this episode, and thank you to Kris for adding them to the show notes because you are posting this following our recording. Listener questions. You guys ready?
Let's do it.
If Buksa goes, which Kris thinks he will, who do we try to get for his and Tejan's combined salaries? Maybe Lewandowski is sick of being ballooned or snub in Europe and wants to see where Buksa made his name. That's a good point. I mean, I think that's a pretty decent replacement. Sean, who do you think we try to go out in this offseason if we were trying to replace Tejan and Buksa?
I think, I hate to kind of have a cop out, but I think realistically it's probably going to be somebody like Buksa that we hadn't heard of before the Revolution signed him. I don't think they're going to go out and get a name player. I don't think that's their style, and nor do I think they should. So I don't have somebody off the top of my head that fits kind of that mold, but I think they need to go out. If Buksa leaves, they need to go out and find another striker. And maybe the solution next season is that they don't play with 2 strikers again, if they go back to a 1 striker system. I don't love Gustavo Bo as the 1 striker, but I think either way, you go out there and replace Adam Buksa with another striker. And then this is the, not to change the topic, but this is the big question on how the offseason goes, is whether or not Buksa stays. Because if Buksa stays, I think you commit to that diamond formation and you build that, and your player selection and the players you bring in, have to fit into that diamond. But if Buksa leaves, then I think that kind of opens the door to a formation change again, where you're not playing with those two strikers, and you maybe go out and play a 4-5-1 again with real wingers, and then you have to replace Tajon Buchanan with probably two wingers at this point to make that work.
Yeah, if Buksa goes like I'm suspecting will happen, this also tells me that the Revolution are going to be sitting on quite a hefty stack of cash, and I want to see them turn that around and actually spend quite a bit. We talked earlier that there are no TAM level players on this roster. We have 3 designated players that we can see, but after that, it's Wilfred Captoon who sits on the bench in a playoff match. Not an acceptable allocation of resources, in my opinion. And now we've sold Tajon Buchanan for reported $7 million transfer fee. And if Adam Buksa is going, there's going to be a transfer fee involved in that too. So I would like to see the Revolution go out and spend a lot of money. You're asking for a player name. I mean, frankly, it's a global sport. I have no idea. There's way too many people, way too many countries to be thinking about where someone can come from. I would assume it would be some sort of international player. There will be international spots opening up, particularly if a lot of the players that we suspect are not going to remain on the roster are not on the roster. Then those spots are going to open up, and I think that's where they'll look. I think you need to bring in another tall player. Doesn't have to be a heading specialty player like Adam Buksa is, but you need that height. You need something up there, especially Carles Gil. Is not a big player up there. Gustavo Bo, he's 6 foot, but he's not necessarily an in the box type striker. So I would think that you're going to bring in someone with some height. Other than that, I don't have a name. There's way too many people in the world. Just pick a name out of a hat, and that would be my guess.
Some contract decisions came out. Patrick Mullins' exercise option was not picked up, so maybe Patrick Mullins back to New England. Bring him
Juan
home.
Agudelo was also.
I have the list just today. Former Revs who got the axe: Kellen Rowe, Edgar Castillo, Patrick Mullins, Juan Agudelo, and then UNH product Josh Bauer, who we spent a podcast bitching about the Revs not drafting him, released after not making a single appearance for Atlanta United. So a lot of Revolution players that and local products we can bring home.
You got a great list of players that would be coming back to the Revolution if Mike Burns was the GM.
Mike Burns would still give Juan Agudelo $600,000.
Sorry.
That's a deep cut.
I had to go there. I'm sorry.
Our new listeners won't get that one, but that's a deep cut right there. Yeah, I mean, in terms of who to bring in, it's a really tough task, and it really depends on if Buksa leaves. Because if Buksa leaves, you have a designated player spot, and I agree. I think you need an offensive player. Either you bring in a winger, I would say, to replace Tajon Buchanan, essentially, and kind of bring on someone that Carles Gil can kind of play off of, or I think you bring in, as Kris said, a big striker who can kind of bang goals. If Buksa stays, that's going to be a little bit more challenging. You still do have a good amount of money from the Tajon Buchanan sale, so I'm curious how that money is spent. But you got to remember they are also scouting Brazil. For younger players, I know that their scouts are being spotted down there, and they've been tied to some players in the youth academies down there, probably for Revs too, but also remember there's the U22 initiative as well. So it's going to be interesting to see where the Revs go, if they kind of use that U22 initiative and kind of go with a bit of a youth movement, or if they bring in more of an established third designated player. Either way, I think we could list off all the names we could think of, and it's probably going to be someone we don't know of, because I didn't know who Adam Buksa was when he came in. I didn't know Gustavo Bo when he came in. I didn't really know. I think I'd heard of Carles Gil, but I didn't know anything about him when he came in. So it's probably going to be an unknown player that we will scout using YouTube videos and try to guess if they're good. So
I'm gonna
quick question: Would either of you trade for? And this is just would be a part of that money, a very small part of that. Would either of you trade for Sebastian Lletget from the Galaxy, who apparently they're looking to shop, and who the LA Galaxy rumors account, which I have no idea how credible they are, said the Revolution is one of the team interested in them. Again, I don't know how credible they are, but based on the fact that Mike McGee and a number of people that write for MLS follow that account, I feel like there's probably some credibility to them.
Yes and no. So
I mean, What was his
Sebastian
salary?
Leget's going to fit, right?
He's under contract through 2023, and he's making I think it was his guaranteed comp this year was something like 923,000. So he's very much a TAM player.
Mm,
No,
I don't love it. I mean, I guess, but I don't love it at all. 26 games for the Galaxy, 3 goals. I would have to kind of look into him a little bit more, but I'm not in love with it. I guess it depends on what you're asking, because I mean, as we've been saying, the Revs don't have any TAM players right now, so they have. I mean, they could afford kind of an overpay for a TAM player. You could,
Yep.
if you could think you could fit your system, you're not using a designated player spot on them, you're not going to impact your U22 spots, and you have the allocation money. Your window is closing. I'd rather you bring him in and, kind of in the same way that you brought in Lee Win. He wasn't worth the salary he was getting, but it's still a bench option. Not to say that Jet is a bench option, but I guess what I'm saying is, I don't mind overpaying on the salary if we can get him for, I'll trade a 3rd round pick for him, but if they're asking for, $500,000 in allocation money, I would say no to that.
I mean, you gonna sign Josie Altidore next? I don't know.
Hey, I think. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I like Sebastian Lletget, and I think that he can provide a lot to a team at that salary. It kind of scares me. I don't think Lletget is necessarily a TAM level player. I understand that he's a mainstay with the U.S. men's national team, maybe controversially to a lot of U.S. men's national team followers that are more, I guess, Eurosnob style. But I mean, I just don't know what this team. I think this team needs to be looking for a more long-term solution than someone to come in as a Band-Aid fix. When you're talking that sort of salary, you're going to be looking someone that's going to help, that you want to shape the roster around when you're spending that sort of money. That's why I made the jab with Josie Altidore too. I mean, that's a little different because he's a striker. Just bring him in, put him up top, let him score some goals. You're not going to build a roster around Josie Altidore. I still wouldn't sign Josie Altidore for the Revolution, for the record, but I don't like the idea of bringing in Sebastian Lletget personally. But again, I would have to know what the price is too. What is the trade ask? If the money's right and if the salary can come down, maybe.
You could convince me for the right price. You could convince me, yeah. And the other thing too is if Bruce feels this is Bruce gets the benefit of the doubt on this because he's Bruce Arena. Although we're questioning his GM skills apparently. But it's a player he's familiar with. So if he's looking at this team and he's saying, boy, I'd much rather have Lletget than Traustason, and they're able to dispose of Traustason and bring in Lletget and not pay a ton, I don't hate it. I really don't hate it. I think it makes sense financially wise. It doesn't really break the bank for you. So I can be convinced on this if it's a fit.
Yeah, I just would really quickly. I think that if the Revolution are committed to the diamond, I think it'd be a great fit. And I think he'd be a much better option than Traustason and a much better option than Captum. And I get the comparison to Altidore, but Lletget doesn't have. Well, first of all, he's 3 years younger than Altidore. He's 29, so he's still very much in his prime. And I think you can get another 2 or 3 good years out of him, at least. So I don't think you're buying into a bad contract given his age. But I think if you're going with the diamond, I think he would slot right in very well into one of those positions, just in front of Matt Polster, and I think he'd be a good addition to the team. Again, if Books is leaving and there's going to be a formation change, then it doesn't make so much sense. But I do think what the Revolution did yesterday, and if you had him starting over Tommy McNamara, or if you had him as a bench option to come in, I honestly think he'd be starting over Tommy McNamara. But if you had him as an option to come in, I think that would be an option you'd turn to on your bench a lot sooner than what Bruce Arena did. Although again, I don't think you sign a $900,000 a year player to be on your bench. But again, 442 diamond, I'm all in on Sebastian Lletget, and I even think if it costs you close to $500,000 and general allocation money, it's probably worth it.
Yeah.
You're kind of turning me around to the idea of it now, so I don't know. I agree that it would definitely be upside over Traustason and even McNamara, and that having McNamara as more of a depth piece, I think, is such a utilizable weapon for the Revs. So yeah, maybe that makes more sense than what I'm initially thinking.
Well, honestly, I thought Lletget was older than he was because I feel like he's been around forever. And then when I realized that he's 29 and doesn't turn 30 until September of next year, it makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, it's like Diego Fagundes is 26, but it seems like he's like 36 at this point. All just because of how long he's been around, not because of how he plays. I don't want anyone to get that misconstrued. Rennie Swan asks, he says, this kind of ties into this, but he says, what are some factual things that will happen to the Revs in the next few months? And also, please speculate on likely weaknesses to address. So we've kind of talked about the offensive side of it. I personally just wanted to kind of add that I want to see a defender added. I think a center back would be nice. I think we've been talking about that for a year. I think the Farrell-Kessler combination is fine. But I'm not in love with it, and I think that Andrew Farrell is going to be 30 next year. So I would like to see a veteran third center back brought in as well. I think that is probably a weakness that I think we want to address. And we also need to come up with a contingency plan for if Matt Turner ever decides to leave. I don't think he is going to leave. He just signed a contract extension at the beginning of the season, so I think Matt Turner is going to be sticking around a little bit longer. But in case he doesn't, Brad Knighton is a free agent. Earl Edwards Jr. is your third string keeper who I don't think is anywhere close to starting. So I think goalkeeper position is going to be interesting to see how they develop that as well. In terms of what are some factual things we can expect from the Revs, I would bet a decent amount of money that Adam Buksa is sold. Outside of that, I'm not sure there's going to be a ton of movement on this roster, just going through who's under contract. Bo Buksa, Bunbury, all under contracts. Bai just signed a contract extension for the 3-year contract with a 4th year team option. So he's going to be hypothetically in New England through his age 30 season. Luis Caicedo I could see leaving. Andrew Farrell is under contract. Heel is under contract. Jones is under contract. Brad Knighton's a free agent, just said that. Polster and Turner under contract. And then McNamara, Captoon, Mafla, De La Garza, Boateng. No one knows their status. Earl Edwards Jr. Also, it's unclear if they have 1-year deals or if they have more than 1 year. Tristison does have a 2-year contract with a team option for 2023. I'm curious to see if he leaves for Europe. This didn't seem to really work out for him, so I could see that being a Alexander Butner type scenario where Tristison and the team just kind of come to a mutual agreement to part ways. And outside of that, I don't know if there's any other factual stuff that I can kind of say. I think Verfuth is gone. I think Kizza is gone. And outside of that, I'm not sure. Those 5 or 6 players are kind of all in between on whether or not they're staying or leaving. So it's going to be interesting when contract decisions come out, because we could see a good chunk of this roster being retained and kind of holding over until next year, or we could see kind of a wipeout where we could see Captoon, McNamara, Caicedo, Caldwell, kind of that central midfield completely dispersed and gone, and the Revs go out and really try to upgrade that central midfield. So it's going to be interesting to see over the next couple of weeks where they go forward. So guys, I guess I'll kick to you, Chris. What do you expect to kind of happen in this offseason? Anything that you definitely are expecting to happen?
I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen, but I think what will happen is going to happen quick, because the Revolution also have to look forward to the Champions League coming up. They're going to have to start getting ready for that as well, which fantastic. And that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. I can't wait for it. But I would like to think that they're going to try to get all their affairs in order in advance of that happening. And that's, I think, mid-February that tournament begins. Mm-hmm. So I think what will happen, it's gonna be a pretty rapid succession. I am pretty confident that the Revolution already know a lot of the moves that they want to make. They already probably have a lot of players lined up that they are willing to offer contracts to. So I would like to think this gets done quick, and not like the Revolution of old, where it's all last minute signings or signings 3 weeks after the season starts. So yeah, that's my opinion, and that's it's not facts. It's I don't know how much fact I can provide as far as what the future holds, but that's what I think is going to happen. I don't know what players. You made a good point of it, Greg, running through all the positions and what players are under what statuses. You can't really predict too much, because there's always going to be some surprises once that roster decision statement comes out.
Mm-hmm. It's very, very possible that next week Maciel and Matt Polster are the only central midfielders on this roster. I guess Tristison as well. But Sean, what do you definitely think will happen in this offseason? Is there any weaknesses you want to see addressed?
No, I completely agree with everything you said, Greg. They need more center back depth for sure. Andrew Farrell can't play all but one game next year. like you said, he's 30. The Revolution are going to have a busier schedule because of CONCACAF Champions League. They need another veteran option back there to kind of be the rotation center back with John Bell. That's very certain. I think the Revolution need more fullback depth. I don't expect Christian Moffler to be back next year, so I think they need more fullback depth. That can be younger guys. It would be nice if Ryan Spalding maybe made the jump up to be Jawan Jones's backup. I'm assuming Adam Books is gone, so I think they need to and will go out and sign another experienced striker. But on top of that, I think they also need more depth at striker. I don't think Kizza or Renix is the answer, and I don't think Bunbury offers as much as he used to in that striker role. So I think it would be nice to have another depth piece up top that can kind of give you different options up there. But I'm assuming Buxa is gone, I think there's got to be a lot of thought about whether or not you do change this formation and go back to a 4-5-1. And if you go back to a 4-5-1, then I think a lot of money needs to be put into replacing Tajon Buchanan with a winger and also finding a better left winger. Boateng should come back, but I think he should play more. But I still think his best role, especially as he's getting older, is to be a bench player coming off the bench. I do have one question for you though, because you mentioned the guys that are definitely back next year, and I think you're probably right about Matt Polster, but I don't know that I've seen the length of his contract. I'd be surprised if it was only a year and a half, but I don't know that I've ever actually officially seen that. So when I'm going through the list of kind of starters and their status for next year, he's the one guy that there's a little bit of a question mark in my mind. Again, I would assume he's got more than a year and a half, but transfer market, for example, which isn't always right, but actually seems to be pretty accurate on the contracts they do have. It says his contract is up at the end of this year. That would come as a surprise to me. But have you seen somewhere where it's more than this year? Again, it would be unusual that it wouldn't be, but I just don't know for certain on that one.
Daily Record. I have Daily Record Daily Record. That's what I have in my notes here. Signed a 2.5-year contract through 2022 with a 1-year option.
Okay.
That's what I have.
Hopefully that's accurate.
We'll find out soon if this is wrong. I don't know how.
I mean, I'd be very surprised if it was only a 1. Oh yeah, I see. There's RangersNews.uk says it's a 2.5-year deal. Oh, that's also referencing the Daily Record. So we'll see how good the Daily Record sources are soon. But I'd be surprised if that wasn't the case. I was trying to look it up earlier and couldn't find it until you said that.
Yep, no, Polster 2.5 years, so it looks fine. Also, I want to clarify something because I think we talked on a previous podcast. The MLS Players Association released a list of players that had team options and players that had free agents, and I cross-referenced these lists with some team announcements earlier this week, and they're not complete lists. So these lists came out, and I think we talked about Teal Bunbury as a free agent, he's a team option. And Scott Caldwell and Brad Knighton are free agents. And we were like, oh boy, I guess those are the only decisions the Revs have to make. That's probably not true. They probably have a lot more to do. So these guys like Tommy McNamara, whose terms are unknown, Christian Moffla, whose terms are unknown, De La Garza, Emmanuel Boateng, especially the McNamara, De La Garzas, Boatengs of the world. They probably came in on a 1-year show-me contract. So it's unknown what their situations are completely, these veterans that were signed in the offseason. So there's a good solid 5 or 6 players that I don't have any clue. But for the most part, there are a solid 10 or 12 players who are coming back, and most of those players are core players. So the Revs do have something to build off of at least. So
that's a really good point, because I knew that list didn't include guys that weren't eligible for free agency. So I knew like a Luis Caicedo didn't have the years to be on that list. But you're right that an AJ De La Garza, I would be pretty surprised if he had a guaranteed year next year. So there could definitely be some surprises on that list.
Just to run through who I know personally will be here in 2022, or at least is signed through 2022. Gustavo Bo, Adam Buxa, although we expect him to be sold, Teal Bunbury, Brandon Bai, who just signed an extension, Andrew Farrell, that's what I have here, DeJuan Jones, Carles Heel, who signed a contract extension, and then Polster, Matt Turner, and I also have Tristison. I have Tristison here as on a 2-year contract. And then also they probably have team options on all the supplemental players and the super draft players. So Colin Verfurth, Henry Kessler, Kizza, Bell, Maciel probably all have options or are under contract. So although Renix, I have no idea. I mean, Renix signed pre-2019, so I guess he just finished his 3rd season as a pro. So he might have a 3-year with a 1-year option. He was under contract last year, so I wonder if his contract is switched over to a team option. That's going to be one that I'm not sure if they're going to hold on to him. They might try to reject the option and then sign him to Revs too, because he seems to be a mainstay down there. But is he worth that $100,000? I'm not sure. Let's get back to some listener questions. This is going to be a bit of a long podcast. Hopefully, our listeners are fine with 2-hour-long miserable podcasts about the Revolution completely failing in the playoffs. But Mike D says, yeah, back to the misery. Mike D says, what happened to Bo at the end of this year? Don't think he reached the levels he had earlier in the season. Sean, what happened to Gustavo Bo?
Yeah, he didn't. He's a very streaky player. I think he started the season in poor form. And I think in this podcast, you're questioning whether or not he should be starting at the beginning of the year because of how he was playing. And then by mid-May, he started getting on fire and went on a really nice tear where he ended up at the top of the scoring charts in MLS for a bit. And then I think his play kind of fell off towards the end of the season. He's very streaky. When he's on his game, he can score from anywhere. And when he's not in his game, he's somewhat invisible. I mean, I shouldn't say that because there's times when he's not scoring and he's creating a lot of chances, but I don't think he was doing much of either in this game, with the exception of that one shot that I think was him that forced a good save from Sean Johnson late. But he was largely invisible in this game, and this was a concern of mine again going back because I think he's streaky and because I think he needs games to gain sharpness. He was extremely unsharp at the end of the season against Miami, and then went 3 weeks without a game, more than 3 weeks without a game. And went into this game. So I think it was completely predictable that he wasn't going to be sharp for this game. And sure enough, he wasn't. I think he's a guy that doesn't do well with long gaps. I think he's a guy that gets into a rhythm and keeps going. We talk about Teal Bunbury being a streaky player. Gustavo Bo is a streaky player too, just at a much higher level when he's at his best than Teal Bunbury is. So I think the Revolution have signed him for another 2 years, and they're gonna have to deal with that. And like I said in this game, Bruce Arena needs to recognize that when he's off his game, and maybe you pull him in the 60th minute, even though can be one of your most dangerous guys.
No, I got nothing to really say that's contrary to your points. But when I look at Gustavo Bo, I don't know if I call him so much streaky as I just think that he's not the player that's going to define the game. I think he needs players that are in form around him in order for him to do well. If he's the only player playing well on the pitch, it's not going to translate into anything. Gustavo Bo needs the other players on the team to really take some of the attention away from him, and then they also need I feel like he needs a lot of the other players to be able to find him when he needs to be found. It was kind of a weird thing a weird way to express what I'm trying to say, but Gustavo Bo he just doesn't seem to create a lot for himself, right? We all know he could score bangers out of nowhere, and that's why he's on the roster. And he had MVP caliber numbers when you look at it. Some say that he had more of a case than Carles Gil for MLS MVP this year. And if you're looking statistically, yeah, that all makes sense. But he's wildly inconsistent, and the fact that I think he needs a much better supporting cast around him, or a much more consistent supporting cast around him in order for him to be more productive, is kind of detrimental to the team. And that's why, when I mentioned earlier, I think Books is the one that I wish would have gotten the 2-year bump instead of Bo, which, I'm a huge fan of Gustavo Bo. I love watching him play, but I don't know how much of a future he has with the Revolution, and especially extending that DP contract 2 more seasons when he's just going to be getting older. He's not very fast. He's not very good at beating defenders one-on-one. He's good at shooting when he has space, and that seems to be the way that everyone's closing him down now. Obviously, he can create for other players as well. At times, we saw that when Carles Gil was out, Gustavo Bo picked it up, but that's not his game. That's not what it's about. His game is about scoring goals, and if he's not getting into position or getting the ball in position to score goals from those spots, then he's just taking up space and wasting a roster spot. So it's a little harsh, I think, on my part, but at the same time, I think that's just how I see it.
Well, I will say, too, his one shot, I think it was deflected, and it took a diving save from Sean Johnson to save it. So I think we might be having a bit of a different discussion if Sean Johnson reacts a little bit late. But, yeah, overall, not a very inspiring performance from Gustavo Bo. I think his issue is when he's shooting the ball. When he came to the Revs, he was shooting the ball 7-8 times and you just figured one would go in. Well, when he's not shooting a whole lot, when he isn't finding space, when he's not clicking with the offense, he's kind of just there. He doesn't really do a whole lot on defense, and he's kind of just a waste of a player. And yesterday was one of those games where he just went quiet. And there were some games kind of down the stretch that he went cold. But with Carlos Gil missing, he did step it up. So I think he deserves a lot of credit. I think he deserves some votes for MVP. I think he proved himself to be a better passer this year as well. Just last night, he didn't show up. New York City did a really, really good job of chipping away at Carlos Gil, kind of taking him out of the game. And Gustavo Bo just never seemed to really get into a rhythm. And when that happens, when you have Bo and Buxa up there, and they both need people to create for them and create space for them, and if the Revs aren't able to work the ball through the center, then Bo's more or less just wasted out there. So, yeah, I think Bo really hit his stride kind of in the center of the year, in the middle of the year there. But yeah, certainly the way the season ended, not great for Gustavo Bo. And yeah, I don't have an issue with him signing next year, but it is going to be interesting, kind of tacking on to that conversation from earlier, how the Revs kind of reshape their formation and how they make Gustavo Bo kind of work, because he doesn't really have a set position, which is something Bruce Arena has said before. And it's going to be interesting to see if they try to nail him down to a certain position and kind of reshape and get away from this diamond formation that seemed to kind of have broken them, kind of towards the end of the season, and certainly last night. So we did get a question from Randy LH. This was a coaching failure for me. Bo and Tejan weren't good, and Arena failed to recognize that and correct it. Should have brought in Boateng in the 60th minute, not double overtime. And then Randy asks, what do we do to fix the team next season? We kind of covered that a little bit, and we will talk a lot about that after roster decisions as well. We'll get into where we think they're going to go once we kind of know who is leaving. We did get a question here, what everyone wants to talk about. I'm surprised it took us so long to get there. James Downing, surely MLS will look at what happened to its top seeds and reconsider the 3-week bye. Chris, MLS has got to fix this, right?
Yes. First, this is not an excuse for why you're going to be bowing out of the playoffs. As professionals, and the players themselves mentioned it. I think Tommy McNamara mentioned it on this podcast last week, that they're professionals. They're ready to go out there, and the long layoff is not something that should be really affecting them in the outcome of the game. And I 100% agree. They should be ready. They shouldn't. You cannot use a 23-day layoff necessarily as an excuse to why you didn't win a game. If you go out there and you look like you haven't played in a year, maybe there's something to it. But 23 days, you're still practicing every day. You're still having some sort of intra-squad scrimmage. Sure, the intensity is not going to be the same, and sure, there's maybe a slight advantage as far as having already played a playoff game to New York City coming into the match. But there's no reason whatsoever that you're going to use this as an excuse. I want to make sure that that's fully clear. That said, MLS absolutely needs to do something different, because you cannot have such a big gap between the end of your season and when your top seeds are going to be playing their first match, because it happened to Colorado too. Both west and east sides. Granted, I don't know how. I don't buy Colorado as the number one seed in the West. I think they got very lucky to end up getting that. They are still a very strong team, but we saw when they faced the Revolution, they were a good team, but I didn't think that they were a number one seed by any means. I don't want to discredit Colorado's season when I say that, but either way, maybe there is something to it when you're looking at it and saying, hey, both top seeds went out. Maybe we need to look at how we're scheduling this, but I don't know. I'm going a little wishy-washy with what I'm saying, but no, you can't use it as an excuse. Yes, it needs to change, even just for the fans and for the enjoyment of everyone else watching the game. You can't take 3 weeks off. I don't know. It baffles me. Sean, do you have anything to add to this? Because I'm just going.
No, I mean, I don't think the team should use it as an excuse, but I do think it is a huge problem. I do think it's a huge disadvantage. I think it was a huge disadvantage for Philadelphia when the Revolution, upset them 2 years ago when they had, I think, 16 days off or, 17 days off. And this is even more with 23 days off. Will the MLS do something about it? Well, next year they're going to have to because there's a World Cup in November. So this is not going to be a problem next year, whether by design or not. They are going to do something about it next year because they have to. So I guess we won't really know for sure until 2023 when this actually becomes an issue again. But I expect they're going to do something about it. And the league is expanding. My guess is what they do about it is that they add an extra team in each conference. I don't think that's what they should do about it. I think there should be less teams in the playoffs. But I think that is what they're going to do. That come 2023, there'll be 8 teams in each conference making the playoffs, and nobody's going to get a bye. That's my expectation. But either way, it will not be a problem next year because of the World Cup. The playoffs are going to have to be very condensed, and the season's going to have to be very condensed. And international windows won't be as big of an issue in the fall because they'll all be saved up for that World Cup.
To that point, the MLS is just growing and growing still. It's still somewhat in an infant stage of what I assume is the plan for its final form, right? As the league evolves and grows, the playoff format has also changed every single year for the last 4 or 5 years, I want to say. There's been drastic changes, and I think that's going to continue to happen until the league is happy with the size of the league and the number of teams that are in it. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Greg, but I wanted to add that point in. So, thanks.
No, I was just going to say MLS also should look into figuring out a way to get the season wrapped up before the international break. I know these games end in December or November, but in my opinion, the more confliction you have with football season, the harder it's going to be on ratings. So this international break really doesn't fit in with the MLS schedule in general. Push the season earlier. If you're going to have cold games kind of start in January, February when it's kind of a dead time for sports. And then, try. I know that's going to make it harder for teams. I know you probably have to kind of maybe do that gradually over time. Maybe you can't just switch it, this year. But, I think this season with the schedule congestion and kind of that weird, it was a very bizarre schedule this year. But, I think MLS really has to look into ways to try to have the season wrapped up before that international break. And maybe kind of move everything a little bit earlier in the year. The Revs got screwed with this. And Sean, I've been waiting for people to make I guess we can't talk a whole lot of trash on that Philadelphia Union point because the Revs were on the other side of that fence last year. So, yeah, it's certainly an excuse, I would say, and you have to give your hats off to New York City. But certainly it had an effect on this game. The Revs looked awful rusty, and the fact that it's happening to top seeds around the league kind of goes to show that this international break is a real nuisance. We did get Sean, anything to add? Sorry.
No, I just I'm glad that the league doesn't have an option of creating this problem next year, because it's stupid. And I think if anything, you'd be better off making decision day after the international break, so at least everybody has one game in after that to regain their fitness or their sharpness. It just makes no sense the way they did this year.
I have to say, I think it's stupid is probably the least analytical response I've ever heard from you, Sean. So well done.
We did get one more question here. Sad PGD. I just want to know, well, first off, we kind of covered this already, but I just want to know why we didn't have many subs until later. We played a lot better when we had on Emma and Teal, but also asked, what's this impact going to be now? So what is the impact of this game? We had an amazing season, breaking records and such, but now it kind of came to a crashing end. It's a lot to take in and realize. So, Sean, actually, why don't I take the floor here for a second? And Sean, Kris, you can add on if you want. I think that this was a really big, blown, missed opportunity. I feel like we talk about this all the time. Every time the Revs draw a big crowd or have a big game and have the eyes on them, they seem to falter. And again, last night, it seems like Boston media was really invested into this game. I heard that a lot of people from the Boston media who typically are not at games were at this game. It didn't conflict with the Patriots, didn't seem to conflict with the Bruins or the Celtics. I guess there was a Bruins game on last night, but the eyes were on the Revolution. I heard there was some 98.5 talk, so congratulations to all the people who are obsessed with getting them on 98.5. You got your annual hour of Revolution talk today. There was a lot of writing on this game, I think. And I think that this season, this team was promoted heavily, and I think that it was getting a little bit more legitimacy, minus the 98.5 morning show making fun of Revolution supporters. I think that this season was a step in the right direction, and this is a lot of the air being let out of the balloon. It kind of feels a lot like the 2014 MLS Cup when the Revs kind of built up something, they lose in the final, and then Dan Shaughnessy is on Twitter talking trash about them again. So I think that this loss is going to turn off a lot of casual fans who turned on the Revolution for the first time and saw nothing very, very special. And in terms of for the Revolution supporter fan base, I think we're seeing it. I think that this is just kind of growing negativity, and that maybe this team is cursed, and they will never win the MLS Cup. I think it's just more negativity on top of a fan base that temporarily suspended their negativity for one season. So that's my thoughts. Sean, do you have anything to add?
I mean, I don't think it impacts much long term, to be honest. I think it would have been great if the Revolution won MLS Cup this year. It would have brought a lot of attention to them. But a lot of good things happened this year. I mean, the Revolution put together their best regular season in history. CBS and TV38 has been a great partner to the Revolution. They actually did their news broadcast on Channel 4 from the stadium before the game, which was really impressive. So they were really hyping it up. And I don't think losing this game is going to stop that. I don't think winning MLS Cup would have made 98.5 talk about the Revs more either. Again, for the fans, it's a terrible loss, and that's disappointing. And for the players, it's a terrible loss. But I think as far as what it really impacts, I don't think it necessarily impacts personnel decision for the Revolution in the offseason. I think the players that were going to leave anyways, and the needs were going to be there anyways. Maybe Bruce Arena sees a little bit more urgency in adding more depth, or whoever the coach is sees a little bit more urgency in adding the depth. But I don't think it has as big of an overall impact as some people thought it would. I mean, as some people think it would. I don't know. Some people think winning a championship for the Revolution is going to all of a sudden put them on the map with the Bruins and the Celtics and the Red Sox and the Patriots. I still don't think it quite does that.
Well,
you know what? Yeah, Boston Cannons win championships all the time, and I still have not seen a single game. So I agree with that comment.
Quick note. The United States men's national team hosted a game in Columbus earlier this season, and there was a local news station in Columbus that they interviewed a woman, and the woman was like, "I would love to have a professional soccer team here in Columbus full time." And a lot of people pointed out on Twitter, they were champions last year. There is a team that played the stadium you're walking out of, and they won a championship last year. So I do think there's a bit of a disconnect between the average sports fan and soccer fan. I think people think winning will bring in fans, as if baseball fans will suddenly fall in love with the game of soccer if they see a championship team. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it's just a slow build, and you have to have fans that are growing on the game. I think it's a long-term build. But anyway, side rant aside, Chris, what are your thoughts on the impact of the last night's game?
Yeah, look, I'm agreeing with Sean, and as far as I don't think it affects the team. I don't the structure of the roster, the front office, anything like that. What was going to happen is going to happen. Maybe it affects Bruce Arena's decision to coach again next year versus not. Had they gone on to lift MLS Cup, maybe that's the only thing I could think of that would have been different in that scenario. But as far as the fan base goes, look, there was a lot of momentum that this team was building and growing, and a lot of interest within Boston and Rhode Island and just New England in general, and getting a lot of attention and deserved attention, in my opinion. And while I don't think that losing last night is going to detract any new supporters that have come in, or some new fans, some new casuals that maybe started following the team this season, they're not going to turn it off because they lost the playoff game. It will slow down the growth as far as bringing in even more and more casuals. If you get to a higher, when you have the attention like they did this season and the momentum of that attention, you're going to really be able to grow your fan base quite a bit more, quite exponentially, especially if you're reaching MLS Cup. Of course, it's not going to be anything on the scale of the Bruins, who I think are the fourth tier in Boston media, but it slows it down a little bit, and that's it. If you want to talk about the 98.5s of the world, just stop trying, because they're not going to care about it. They're not going to talk about it. They don't care about it. There's a few individuals maybe within the station that care about it, but overall, the Revolution and soccer fans are not their demographic.
I was very surprised they made it onto Felger and Match Day. I haven't listened to it yet, but I was very, very surprised that they got any sort of attention. But I really think it's just because they sent some producers down last night. Apparently, they were down in the press box last night. I will give credit to Sarge for starting a little podcast with weekly interviews. I think that's as good as it's going to get. 98.5 is dominating the ratings. They're not going to have any radical changes to their programming anytime soon. But yeah, I think that there was some momentum building here, and I think they were getting a little bit more attention than they normally do. And the fact that it was a season-long build, and hey, this team is really good, you should check them out. I think they did bring in some casual fans recently, and just a bit of a disappointing showing overall.
I am interested to see if the Champions League does any of that as well, especially if the Revolution do well.
No, it will not. I can tell you it will not. I can tell you because I live in the city, in the Philadelphia area, and I have not heard a single person mention the Champions League down here, unless it's on Union Twitter or something like that.
Yeah, I think outside of Seattle and Atlanta's played their Champions League games in the early rounds at small stadiums that only hold 8,000 people. But I think outside of Seattle, you're not going to get much attention on CONCACAF Champions League. Unfortunately, you should. But I don't think I completely agree with Greg. It doesn't move the needle.
No, the months in between two, no, absolutely no impact overall. I don't think. I think it's going to be more for diehard soccer fans. So
I do have to make one quick correction on something Kris said, because I'm sure the Bruins fans would be angry. Is that there's a very strong case to make that the Celtics are actually number 4 in Boston. They do significantly worse in TV ratings than the Bruins do. So I just wanted to throw that out there before the Bruins fans get to us. I didn't realize that until recently, but the Celtics worse on TV.
I thought Celtics were number 2.
At the Bruins.
500 straight sellouts for the Bruins, which is pretty crazy considering there's 40 games a year, so that's 10 years plus of sellouts. So
that's amazing.
Yep. Wrapping up here with some more listener comments from Shaston. Whole team choked. Bruce's timings for subs were mad. Disappointing from Turner since his specialty is shot stopping and penalties. Team didn't look like it came out to win until they had the advantage in extra time. Maria says, such an amazing season. Sad to see it end. Brokenhearted. Crazy game right till the end. And then Robert D'Souza says, wonder how the Revs will bounce back next season. Looks like they could lose Turner and Books in January, and obviously will not have Buchanan next year, which we kind of talked about. Although I'm still optimistic Turner's coming back. He signed a contract extension. Unless he really pushes to make a World Cup run, which we talked about a little bit last podcast, I don't see him leaving. But also really quick, Brandon by extension, I talked about this a little bit. We don't have a salary number, but a 3-year contract, also with a 4th-year team option. Real quick, any objections to this? I believe this brings Brandon through his age 30 season with the club. So 4 more years of Brandon by at right back. Any objections? I'll start with you, Kris.
No, not really. I mean, I don't want to get into my predictions of the season, but I had high hopes for Brandon By coming into the season, and I don't think he necessarily lived up to what my prediction was, but it was a bold prediction again. I still think he had a fantastic year overall. I think he's showing growth. I think he still needs to work a bit on his crossing ability. He's maybe not the best right back in MLS, but you don't necessarily need the best right back in MLS. You just need a solid player at that position, and I think Brandon By fills that hole very well. He does what he's asked. He's very versatile. And overall, he doesn't lose you games. And I think that's a very important thing when it comes to that position. So no objections here.
Yeah, I think he's the weakest link on the Revs back line right now. I think he had a good start to the season. And then I think there were a lot of vulnerabilities that showed in his game late in the year where, he would lose track of runners and his guy would score. Even in this game, it's hard to blame him for the first goal, but he was tracking Rodriguez, who scored the goal. And I think I think Aaron O'Farrell probably should have picked up the run. Brandon By left him to pick up another guy. But we've seen that a lot this season. I don't know who you blame that on, but the communication between him and Andrew Farrell at times has not been good enough. Where there's been times where Brandon By has left his runner and nobody's picked him up. So I think it makes sense to re-sign Brandon By. He's a very solid right back. There's still some aspects of his game that he needs to improve. His crossing sometimes looks good, other times looks like it's not as good as it should be, and his defending sometimes looks really good, other times looks like he falls asleep at key moments. It's without knowing what the salary number is, it's hard to say for certain whether this was a good move, but the Revolution could do a lot worse at right back. So it makes sense to sign him up for long term, assuming it's not some sort of exorbitantly high salary, which would really surprise me.
You find
he is consistently the aerials winner too on the Revolution backline. He won five aerial duels last night. So,
Sean, you find with 3 years?
Yeah, I mean, again, without seeing the salary, if he's somehow got boosted to 500,000 a year, I might not be. But assuming it's I'm guessing it's in the maybe 250, 300 range. Yeah. I'm fine with that. And if he regresses, you can live with that as your backup because Christian Mafla is making more than that and not playing. So
Buys at 170 for salary and 179 for total compensation. Just for comparison, AJ De La Garza was 250 this year. You just mentioned Mafla, who's making around 400,000. Historically, the Revs have spent for outside backs. Somi was over 400,000. Bootner was over 600,000. The list goes on and on and on. So yeah, I think if this is a 250,000 a year contract for 3 years guaranteed and a team option for a fourth. Maybe it starts at 250 and accumulates up to 300,000. I think that's perfectly fine. I think that's the market value for a starter who's not going to cost you an international spot. So I'm fine with everything that was said here. Moving on real quick. Oh, any shout outs, any final notes that you guys want to touch on before we leave here?
No, it's just disappointing that this is going to be the last time, at least for the foreseeable future, that Revolution fans see Tajon Buchanan in a Revolution uniform. A tough way for his Revolution career to end.
Yeah, I kind of want to echo that as well. Just the whole team. This 2021 Revolution team was special. It was a lot of fun to watch. It exceeded so many expectations, and the train just kept on rolling. And this team was it was such a bright spot in the year for me personally, and for I'm sure a lot of other fans. I'm not gonna forget this season, and I'm just gonna. It's sad to know that this is the last time. Last night was the last time that we saw this roster like this on the pitch. Hopefully, there's minimal changes. Obviously, there needs to be some sort of change to get to that next level, and eventually lift MLS Cup. But yeah, it's just sad to see it, and especially if Buxa goes, I'll be really sad to know that I won't get to watch him in a Revs kit anymore. I'm already sad that I won't see Buchanan anymore.
I was going to say Tajon's last game, not his best by far, but he certainly sent us out with a great moment. That the stadium absolutely popped. That might be the loudest I've ever heard it. A wonderful goal, a wonderful moment. It's really a shame that it's going to go down wasted in a loss, but really nice moment to send Tajon Buchanan out on. So, and I'm glad it was a goal and not all of the flopping and crying he was doing throughout the first 117 minutes of the game there. So, quick notes, roster decisions should be known later this week. This is going to come out on Thursday. I think I mentioned this earlier, but the players are notified of the decisions, and then the team will announce it later. So we probably will expect this maybe Friday, Saturday. We'll probably be doing a episode after the roster decisions, and we'll kind of get a little more into off-season talk when that happens. And then just a couple of other quick notes. If you have not read it already, Seth McComer's article from the Bent Musket this week covers the 2014 New England Revolution and their MLS Cup run. It gives an oral history. He did interviews with AJ Soares, Jay Heaps, a number of players with a number of insights. Jermaine Jones, he got Jermaine Jones on the phone, which would be very intimidating, but a lot of good little nuggets there about 2014 and kind of a bit of a culture change at that time. So if you've not read it, please read it. It is wonderful. It's one of the best articles you will see on the New England Revolution all year, if ever. Chris, add it to the show notes. Please do. Yep. So check that out. And then also one note, I wanted to give a shout out for the New England Revolution. It was noted that Tanner Rubello posted on Twitter last night that the Revolution, a very classy move, and very nice, beautiful move. They saved a front row seat in the press box for Ray Sullivan. So just want to give a shout out to the New England Revolution for leaving a seat open for Ray. I thought that was a very, very nice touch, and I'm sure that seat would have been open throughout the playoff run. So very nice touch there in remembering Ray Sullivan. Outside of that, that does it for us today. Please follow us on Twitter at Revolution Recap and follow our Revolution Instagram and Facebook pages. And also please check out our sponsor Glasso Kits and use our promo code RevsRecap for 15% off your order. Make sure you're subscribed on iTunes or wherever you're listening. And if you could, please rate and review us 5 stars. It helps people looking for Revolution content. So please make sure you've rated us if you have not already. We'll be back shortly with our roster decisions episode. The Revs might be done for the season, but we aren't. We'll be here throughout your off season. So whenever roster decisions are made, we will have a podcast shortly thereafter. Until then, thank you everyone for listening. We've really enjoyed bringing you this content and talking Revolution all season long. I wish it had a happier ending, but it was truly a magical season, and we were really glad to be here for it all. So thank you everyone for listening all season long, and go Revs.